Hi, in this video we're going to go over some common tips that I have for math exams. I think these are pretty standard tips, but they're definitely based on my experience as a teaching assistant and as a course instructor who has graded lots and lots and lots of exams and talked to lots and lots of students about exams and have seen things that where I think students can improve on how they prepare for a test. And students prepare for exams in lots of different ways. I think most students do take exams seriously. Okay, maybe not all of the students, but most students do care about how they do on a test. And I've seen lots of different kind of strategies that students use. And I also have seen things that I think work well and things that I think don't work very well. And so that's what I want to talk about in this video. Okay, so I have 11 tips and I'm just going to go in order of what to do before a test and then during a test and then after. Okay, so number one, do any available practice exams. So a lot of the time, not all the time, but many classes will have old exams or practice exams posted on the course website or webpage. And I would recommend that you do them prior to the test. Now don't do them the day before the test, do them like a week before the test. So that way you have time to go over and ask about any questions that you didn't get. And try to time yourself. Don't use it as a study guide. Try to do the study guide, make a study guide, review for the test beforehand, and then take the practice test and see how you do. Right? Don't just look at it as a source of more questions to study with. Do try to make it a timed exam. Time yourself, give yourself the same amount of time as you would for the actual test. And then after you take the practice exam, go over the answers and make sure that you know how to do them. So that's my first tip. But my second tip is more important, I would say. It's don't just do practice exams. And this is a common mistake that I think students make. So what students will do, what a lot of students will do, but hopefully not you, what a lot of students do is they find out that a test is coming up, then they find these practice exams and they say, okay, I'll just look at them. And then, a lot of the times they don't time themselves, they just kind of look at the question and say, I know how to do it. Or, okay, I'll do a few of them and then check with the answer key if there's an answer key. And then what happens? They show up to the actual test, they did the practice test and they did okay, so they're thinking, okay, I'll probably do fine on the actual test. And then the questions they get are different than the questions of the practice test, and then they fail the test, or they don't do as well as they would like, or they don't do as well as they thought they would do. And that's a common mistake that I've seen, and it's because they only did the practice tests. Right? So go over. Don't just do the practice test. You also should study everything. The worksheets, if there are worksheets, homework assignments, problems that are done in class. So if your instructor does some examples in class, make sure you can do questions like that are similar. And also textbook problems, right? So one thing that a lot of instructors do, not everyone, but a lot of the time, is they will just look at the kinds of problems you had to do in class. So worksheet problems that you had to do, homework problems you had to do, questions that they did in class, and just copy a question. Just take that question and change the numbers a little and put that on the test. That's something that a lot of instructors do. Because it's hard. Excuse me. It's hard to, be creative and come up with lots of interesting, creative test questions. I mean, most questions, and this is for a timed test, are going to be fairly generic problems. Questions that you kind of see in any math class that's comparable. So make sure that you can do the questions on the worksheet and the homework and slightly different problems. That will probably help a lot, and you can expect similar questions on the exam. I'm not saying that the whole exam is going to be similar to problems you've done, but a lot of it will be similar. I mean, probably. I can't say for certain, but in my experience, that's just how a lot of exams are written. You just take a question that the professor went over in class, or a question that you had to do for homework, and then just change things up a little bit and then put that on the test. So that's a good thing, That's not a bad thing. It means that it's actually, you can study for this. I mean, you can prepare for this. But I'm just emphasizing this again, don't just look at last year's exam and think, oh, the questions are going to be similar to last year's exam. No, they might not. I've seen exams where there was a homework question, and then they literally just copied and pasted the homework question and changed the 12 to like a 5, and that was the problem. And there would be students who wouldn't get it. And it's like, so students aren't necessarily going to study everything, but when you have a question like that, all students really had to do to be able to get full points was to just know how to do that homework problem and be prepared to do something very, very similar, right? So, don't pass up that opportunity. I mean, it's, for those kinds of questions, they can be like challenging homework problems, but they're problems that you should be expected to know how to do for the test, and that's easy to prepare for. So just go over as much as you can on all the types of questions you've seen before. One thing that instructors sometimes do is they'll just take a textbook, like maybe not the textbook that was used in class, but it could be the textbook that was used in class. Find a problem in the exercises, pick like maybe an even one so the answer is in the back of the book, and then just put it on the test. And I've seen tests where they literally just copied the question. They didn't even change the number. They literally just copied, number 20 or whatever from section 6.5 and put that on the test. Okay. So just be aware of these things, and most professors, when they're writing tests, aren't going to be spending tons and tons of time agonizing over what question to put on the test, because there's not much of a point in doing that. Just imagine a professor waking up one day and saying, oh, I have to write a test. I want to get this done as soon as possible, so I'm just going to, look at the worksheets, okay, scroll down. If it's online homework, just see what questions there are. Okay, students had to do that. Let's look at the textbook and see some questions. Look at maybe some old exams, but you shouldn't count on just old exams, and then they'll just kind of put together a test and say, there you go, I'm done. That's actually how a lot of instructors make exams. But don't say, well, this question that was, similar to the homework didn't show up on the exam last year. Well, who cares? Nobody cares about what was on the test last year. That was last year. That was the final or midterm last year. Okay? So yeah. Don't just look at practice exams. Do them, but just keep in mind that's just one source of practice problems. Don't just study that. Okay, number 3. So this is more of like a philosophical thing, I guess, the way I'm phrasing it. Focus on getting things out, not getting things in. What do I mean by that? So sometimes students will prepare by trying to jam in a ton of information into their brain. So they're going to, read over their notes. They're going to review the lecture notes, maybe flip through the book, and then say, okay, that makes sense, I'm ready. That's what I mean by trying to get things in. But think about what you have to do on a test, and this is for a math test anyway. You're going to be asked questions, and you have to give answers. That's the kind of thing you should be practicing. Giving answers to questions, not trying to get all the information into your head. So when I say focus on getting things out, I mean focus on answering questions, responding to a prompt. And you can do that by looking at practice tests, right? That's a good source of problems. You can look at textbook problems and try to do those. You can try to turn, if you have notes and a professor does an example in class, cover up the answer and see if you can do it yourself. And that's a way to kind of turn your notes into something that you can practice out of instead of just something that you kind of, look at. Okay. And that's really important because sometimes students will say, well, if they don't do well on a test, they'll say, well, I understand the concept. I'm going to class, I'm paying attention, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. But think about what they had to do on a test, right? Doing well on a test is not about going to class and understanding what the instructor was saying. It's about, here are some problems, you have an hour or so to do it, get as many points as you can, and the more points you get, the better you'll do on the test. The fewer points you get, the worse you'll do on the test. That's really what it boils down to. Okay, so just don't forget that. That's how you're going to be graded, not how good your notes are or how much you are paying attention or anything like that. Now that matters, but it's not what's directly resulting in your score. Okay. So number 4, space out studying time. Okay. So of course studying matters, right? You can't just wake up the night before or wake up during the test and then expect to do well on it. It takes time, and I would encourage you to actually, do things with the intention of studying for the test. Like, don't just say, okay, I understand the material, I don't need to study. I think that you should actually take time and do things specifically for the test. And not just the amount of time you spend matters, but how you space out your time matters. So, you shouldn't cram. Right? Cramming is not an effective way to study for a test. Like just studying 5 hours a day or 5 hours the day before the test is not going to be as effective as 1 hour a day for 5 days. Now, if you think about that, that's 5 hours still, but you're going to get more out of spacing the 5 hours over a longer period of time than you would in the 5 hours leading up to the test. And, one of the things about math is that you can't really force yourself to learn math fast, right? You'll just end up learning at whatever pace you learn in. And you have to, I would encourage you to take that into account as you're preparing, right? A lot of the time, most of the time, I would say, people learn things slowly, right? We learn a little bit each day, and then it builds up over a longer period of time. Not, just learning tons of information the day before. So think about that as you're planning how you're going to study for the test, and hopefully you do plan how to study for a test. And try to block out time in your schedule so that things are spaced out and not all at the last minute. Okay. So number 5, mix up the order that you practice problems. So what I mean by that is sometimes, so if you look at how homework is done, right? How are homework problems presented? It's lots of homework problems on one section, then a bunch of homework problems on a different section, then a bunch of homework problems on a different section, but they're all kind of the same topic. But on a test, if you think about it, it's not going to be like that, right? Things are going to be mixed up. And you might have one question that has several parts, and then one part is on one section, and then a different part is on a different section. And you're not getting that practice, that kind of mixed up practice, when you're just going in order. So don't just do review problems, try to make it a mixed review. Right? Try to mix the problems up, and that'll be closer to what the test will be like. once I saw a student who was doing problems. They were studying, but the problems that were written, like it had the topic section. So all the problems were organized by section. So it's like, section 6.2 and then practice problems from 6.2 and 6.3 practice problems from 6.3. And the student would just go down the list and do them, right? But when a question shows up on a test, it's not going to say section 6.2, and it might not be next to questions from section 6.2, and that might throw you off, right? So just make sure that you're doing a mixed review if possible, instead of just doing things where you sort of can tell what's coming next, right? Okay, so those are 5 tips about how you can practice and prepare for the test. Now let's talk about actually taking the test. So number 6, show up on time. Well, okay, most students are going to try to show up on time, so that's not really a big tip. Know where the exam room will be in advance. So yeah, sometimes I see students who, so sometimes the exam room, depending on the way your class does things, the room where you take the test might not be the same as the room where you are taking the class. So make sure you find out where the room is and what time the test is, and try to show up early. Try to show up like 10 minutes early. Don't wait until the day of the test or like 20 minutes before the test and then say, oh, I have to figure out where the test room is. Prepare for this in advance if you can. It just helps you stay calm when you kind of know what to expect. And along those lines, feel free to bring anything to help you stay calm. Right? Like stuffed animal, whatever helps you feel calm, good luck charm, that's fine. As long as you're not breaking any rules, like you might have to keep it in your bag, but if it helps you stay calm, then I think that'll be helpful. Bring extra pencils. Don't just bring one pencil. You might be used to just bringing one pencil, but just bring extra pencils just in case one of them breaks. And you might not have a pencil sharpener with you, There might not be a pencil sharpener in the room, so just bring some extra pencils. And if you do only bring one pencil, then, of course you're gonna ask the instructor if they have a pencil, but they might not have any pencils with them. They might only have like a pen, and then you have to do your test in pen, which you might not want to do. So just bring extra pencils, erasers, that sort of thing. It just helps you feel that you are prepared, right? Okay, so now you get the test. Try to breathe deeply. Take a deep breath. And tip 7, read the questions carefully. That's really important. So when you get the question, I think it would be a good idea to kind of just look at all of the questions, not just, look at the first one. So just look through the different questions and then read the questions carefully. So let's say you're asked to do, let's say this is a calculus class and you're asked to do an integral. Well, one of the things that from integrals is that if you change one of the numbers from like a 3 to a 4, it can turn the problem from a question that you can do, that's like not that hard, to a question that's like impossible. So if you're going to copy the numbers down, right, make sure that it's correct. Just read the question carefully. Just don't rush. Just make sure that the question, that what you're writing, that you're doing the problem that they're asking you to do, basically. Because the way these things are graded is if you do a different problem than the problem that was asked, it's hard to get any points. So because these things are graded on a rubric, right? There are guidelines for how these things are scored. So if you just do like by accident the wrong question, you might be spending 10 minutes on that, and what score are you going to get? 0, because you didn't actually answer the question that was asked. So that's not what you want. You want to make sure that if you're spending time, you're actually going to get points, right? So So make sure that you read the question carefully. I mean, it doesn't happen very often that students will do the wrong problem, but it does happen sometimes. Okay. Number 8, don't skip steps. Make your solution understandable. So, this is for math, right? So when we grade, let me just say something about how exams are graded, at least in my experience. So after you take the test, the professor collects all of them and makes a rubric. And they might have made the rubric before even giving the test out. So there's a rubric, there's scoring guidelines for, if a student did this, give them this many points. If a student wrote that, give them that many points. And so, a 10-point problem might be split up like that. And so there are certain things that your instructor or your TA, whoever's grading a test, are looking for. And it's important to make sure that what you wrote down actually has those things. And so try not to skip steps. Also, if you skip steps and then you write something that's incorrect, we can't give you credit for that. But if you show the step of how you got it and you just messed up the arithmetic, like maybe you said that 3 times 2 was 5 instead of 6, then we can say, oh, well, the student did the step correctly, they just messed up at the end. And then you can still get some points for that. So don't skip steps unless they're like very, very obvious, right? But definitely not the main steps, because the way the rubric is written, at least in my experience, is that it's like 3 points for this step, 3 points for that big step, 4 points for like finishing the rest or something. So if you don't show those big steps, then you can't get the points in between. With that said, you probably will end up showing your steps because you're doing the problem, so you're going to end up showing steps anyway. But I'm just saying, be mindful that you show your work, and also that you make your solution understandable, because whoever's grading this isn't going to be a mind reader. They have to grade what they see on the page, and they are not supposed to say, well, the student probably meant to do this, or they probably knew how to do it, but they just wrote down the wrong thing. No, your exam is graded based on what's written. Okay, so if you, in your head, you were thinking the right thing, but then you wrote down the incorrect thing, well, what's going to be graded? The incorrect thing, because that's what you wrote down. So just make sure that your solution is understandable. Make sure that, make it so that the person giving the score can see that, yes, you have the components, and so you're going to get the score that you want. Okay? So don't, it's not a personal thing. It's just the person needs to be able to kind of check off the box, so to speak, and give you the points. And they can only do that if they actually see the things on your paper. Okay, number 9. Feel free to answer questions out of order. So, depending on past tests you've seen, especially if there were tests that were administered online, there might have been tests where you can't go on to the next question before answering the one that you have. But on a timed test in a in-person class, that's not how it is. And probably in a whatever format, if you're taking a college class and you're taking a test, chances are you will be able to go back and forth between the questions. So during the test, it's really all about getting as many points as you can get, right? The test is going to be out of a certain number of points. Each question is out of a certain number of points. Your goal during the test is to rack up as many points as you can get. That's the goal. And it may be that you know how to do number 6 on the test, but maybe not how to do number 2. Well, don't spend all your time on number 2 not getting anywhere if you can be getting points on number 6. I mean, you only have a certain amount of time. You're trying to get as many points as you can get. So if number 6 is a question you can do, then do it. Do the questions you can do first. Just get the easy points, and then once you get those easy points, focus more on the harder questions that require that you're not sure about. Put a little question mark on some of the questions if you're stuck, and then go back to it later, right? So it really is all about getting points. I mean, you don't want to realize at the last minute, the last question on the problem is actually really easy. I could have been getting full credit for that last question, and then you didn't because you were spending all your time on the hard question. Don't do that, right? Just get as many points as you can get right away. Look through the whole test. Do the easy ones first, and then come back to the more difficult questions later. Number 10. So that's during the test. Review your test after you get it back. Okay, and maybe you were embarrassed by how you did, and it's very easy to kind of get the test back and kind of just not look at your score. Just kind of like your professor hands you the test and you kind of fold it over and just put it in your bag. Okay, don't do that. Look at it. Can be embarrassing, it can be difficult, it's okay. Just take a deep breath and go through the test. Look at the feedback that you got. See which questions you got right, see which questions you didn't get right. And another thing that's important is make sure that you add the points and make sure that you actually got the correct score. This is not really an issue when it's online grading for the most part. Okay, if your test is graded online, then it's automatic. But if your test is graded by on paper, and your instructor or TA, whoever grades the test, adds up the scores themselves, they might have accidentally made an arithmetic mistake. Like they might have, added the numbers and got 70 when it should have been, 80 or 76 or something. Or maybe they took off 2 points, and then instead of giving you maybe it's out of 10 points, and they took off 2 points, so it says -2, but then in their head they just kind of did the wrong thing, and they added 2 points instead of 8 points. These things do happen, especially if you have one person grading lots of different exams. I mean, it's easy to make an arithmetic mistake. It's not on purpose, it's just something that happens when you're trying to add up lots of different scores, and yeah. So make sure the exam score is correct. If you have any questions whatsoever, hopefully the professor will go over the exam, or you will get an answer key. But they might not, that's okay. Just, if you have any questions whatsoever about where you lost points, or what you should have written, or something like that, ask about it, right? Don't do it in a hostile way, like, hey, you gave me this bad score. Instructors do care about being fair and giving you the accurate score. They're not going to be like, well, I don't like you, so I'm just going to give you a bad score. They're not going to be like that. They're going to have a rubric, and they're going to grade based on the rubric. Okay? So for math, it's actually pretty objective. I mean, the more you write the things that are on the rubric, the more points you'll get. That's really what resulted in your score. So if you have any questions, just ask, but not in a hostile way. Don't ask for more points, because the professor graded on the rubric and just had to follow the rubric. And then the last tip is reflect a little about what you could do to improve. So, this is always a good practice, right? Like if the test went well, think about, what did I do that led to this result? And if you didn't do well, then ask the same thing. Like, could I have done anything differently? And it can be hard, because sometimes if a student, especially if a student thinks that they're going to do well on the test, but then they didn't, it can be hard to, if you're the student, to know what could you have done differently, right? And that may mean that you should, if you're in that situation, then you should consider asking a TA or going up and talking to your professor and say, hey, I want to discuss my exam, can we talk about it? I'm concerned about how I'm doing, and see what they say, okay? If you're not doing as well as you would like, but you kind of know the reason, like maybe you have multiple classes going on, and it's just there's a lot going on, and it's hard for you to study and be as prepared as you would like. That's one thing, right? But if you're really trying, you're putting in lots of time and effort, and you're still bombing the test, and you're following the tips that I'm giving you, then that's a more serious thing, right? So I would definitely encourage you to talk to a TA or a professor and see what they say. It may be that the class you're taking is not at the right level. I mean, it's important. I understand that when it comes to math, a lot of students want to get through the classes and do it, but if you're going to sign up for a class, you want to make sure that you have decent odds of doing well in the class, right? I mean, don't sign up for a class that you're kind of going to fail. I mean, make sure that you're signing up for classes that are an appropriate level for you. And you're going to learn more that way, you're going to do better that way, you're just going to have a much better time if you take classes that are at the right level. And that's something that I have seen where students are just, unfortunately, they're not as prepared as they could be, and it kind of bites them later. And they have to drop the class, and then, they're in a difficult spot. But in that situation, I would encourage students to, consider if that's something that's happening to you, then, maybe you should consider withdrawing from the class and just spending time to rebuild your fundamental knowledge and skills, the prerequisite material, so that when you do take the test, or when you do take the class again, you're going to be much better prepared for the class. Okay, so those are my 11 tips for taking an exam. And I think that if you do follow these tips and you haven't, then you'll end up doing much better on average. I can't make any promises, but I think that these tips are very solid tips. And I think that when students follow these things, these tips, they do better on the test. Okay. If you feel like you're doing all these things and you're still not doing well on the test, then I'm sorry that this is what's happening. But in that case, I would really encourage you to see someone in person. See your TA, see your instructor, talk to them, and see what personalized tips they can give you. Show them what you've been doing to prepare, show them your test, and try to have that conversation with them. Okay, best of luck.